Welcome to the Dazzling Show. On this episode of the Dazzling Show, I'm going to discuss self-care is not equal to selfish. Hi there. I'm Rebecca Jackson, the host of the Dazzling Show, a podcast for moms by a mom with over 23 years experience in the parenting game and over 15 years as a stay-at-home mom. I've been there. I've done it. I know how hard it is to prioritize yourself as a mom, especially when you've got all your littles doing all the things that need your attention. This podcast is here to help you learn the art of overflow. The Dazzling Show is going to have you taking care of yourself as the priority with no guilt far more often. So come along with me. I just can't wait to see you there. Welcome to the Dazzling Show. Today I'm talking about self-care not being selfish. As moms in the world, I know that it's really hard to practice self-care because we so oftentimes feel like we're spending time on ourselves and therefore it has to be selfish. So today I want to put that untruth to bed. It is an untruth. Self-care is not the same thing as other selfish things that you can do. Self-care is at base survival. Self-care is not selfish. It is something that every human being needs to practice. It is basic survival. It is not selfish. And quite frankly, no matter whether you're human or in any other species, taking care of yourself is survival. We have to do certain things or we will go extinct as a human being, ourselves. We will go extinct as human beings if we don't have access to certain things that we as base level humans in an apocalypse would still need. We've all seen the movies. We know fresh water, access to medicine, access to food of some sort so that we can have nutrition. We need to hydrate ourselves, whether it be drinking water to hydrate our body internally or whether it be moisturizing our skin. Hygiene, nutrition, rest, and real sleep, and other care practices that are basic survival. There's just no way around it. So right now, you need to put to bed in your head the thinking that self-care is selfish. When I talk about self-care, I mean a vast array of things, not just those bare minimum survival things that we do, sleeping, eating, hydrating ourselves, and other personal care practices. We have so many ways that we should be considering ourselves and our needs and our care that we don't give ourselves a fraction of the time to barely even cover the basics. So today's myth is that self-care is selfish, and I'm going to spend the next episode through my storytelling and through my lessons learned of that story, explaining to you how I came to understand and how I hope you are inspired to understand that self-care is not selfish. It is survival. And the more we prioritize our self-care, ultimately, the better it will all work out for our family, for everyone in proximity to us, for all of the people that we stand to overflow into. If you listened to the pilot episode, last week I discussed the art of overflow and how I plan on teaching you that through the course of this podcast series, this season and in future seasons. This season is specifically based around introducing that idea into your life. I know as a mom, I was told so many times before I even had all my children, when my older ones were little, by so many people that you have to make sure you pour into your own cup. You have to make sure you pour into your own cup. And I really at the time didn't understand what they meant, and I thought it was some silly saying, and I didn't get what they meant. And I think I didn't get what they meant because I didn't look at life and caring for myself in any abundant priority at all to begin with before being a mom, really. But also, I think I didn't get what they meant because I didn't look at it as pouring into people. And there was a whole process for me to, if you listen to episode 1, to kind of comprehending and understanding that I was a vessel, that I did need to be filled to the best of my ability, to the goodness of how God created me to be, and that if I did that, I was going to be the best version of myself for the people around me. And so pouring from me felt silly because I just thought there's no way I have time to pour into myself. Like, I don't have time to do a fraction of the things that I do for the people around me for myself, but I keep doing for other people. Like, I do keep doing. And so I think that the pouring is ill-conceived because I don't believe that we ever fully are the ones doing the pouring. I think God is pulling what there is of us out into the world, and that He is forever replenishing just enough to keep us going, especially as moms. And that ultimately, it's not about us pouring into ourselves. It's about allowing ourselves to live in that being that always is a little tiny wellspring at the bottom of our cup. If you listened to last week, I spoke about how I let my cup dry up so badly that it cracked, and that I wasn't pouring into my people, I was leaking through cracks. Now, I don't know if I really cracked just because I dried up in my care, or if life and trauma and all of the other things that I had endured, some of which you'll come to hear about on this podcast, some of which I hope you'll read someday in my memoir when I get it published. But the things that happened to me, I believe, also cracked my vessel. And in next week's episode, we're going to talk about how I learned to glue those cracks back together and what that whole journey looked like. But for this basic session, I need you to understand that even though my cup was cracked severely and I wasn't actively pouring into me, there was still something that was dripping out into my people. And it was the least of me, but it was there because God was making sure I still had something to leak out of me into my responsibilities, into my children, into my roles, into the things that depended on me, because He never let me run completely dry. And because even in my brokest, most desperate points, I was still crying out to Him to keep me together. He was keeping that cup together like it was a floating jigsaw puzzle in midair, and He was keeping something in it at all times, but that stuff was oozing out of the bottom into my people. And do you ever pour like that last cup of coffee out of the coffee pot and there's like those grinds? Or sometimes if you get like a fancy coffee, that last mouthful feels a little grainier because you've got a little bit of that grind from your coffee or your espresso down in the mix of your cup. I feel like, to me, it's not really the most delicious taste. Like, sometimes I actually skip that last little smidge. Like, I try to time it just right so all the granules just settle back to the bottom and I don't drink it. It tastes like my drink, but it's not quite the same consistency that I like. It's not the same feeling that I enjoy as I'm drinking it. And I feel like when I was dripping, oozing the last little bits that God just kept ensuring I had in me to just fight another day into my people, they were getting that sip. Like, I think they were getting me, but like the least polished, least great, least glory-filled, least dazzling version of me. And when that happened, I realized that I needed to do better at making sure that I was filling the cup, that I was intentionally spending time in His presence and doing other things that He has shown me, tried and true, that I need, that I require in order to not only be allowing what He's giving me to build up, but for that to reach a peak at the top of my vessel and overflow the most exceptional excess and abundance out of me. And so that's kind of the story you're going to hear today, is how I learned that specific lesson, how I realized that it wasn't about pouring out of other people, that it was about making sure that I was pouring into myself. Like that, those are nice sayings, but that's not what it was. I wasn't pouring into myself, really. I was allowing myself to be poured into in my beliefs by my Creator. And God was making sure that He was giving me a little bit even in my least. And so as I healed those cracks, which I'm going to talk about next week, and as I realized what basic self-care and like really just basic survival looks like, and as I realized how to expand on that and become greater in the things that I did and the benefits that I took, that I was really just giving more opportunities for the goodness that God was pouring into me to build up and overflow out of me. And so with that, we're going to roll right into my storytelling, because this is the story of how I realized that, you know, basic self-care isn't even a luxury. It shouldn't be a luxury to moms. And that was about 8 years ago, and it was approaching our 10th wedding anniversary. My husband and I, it was the year 2017, if you're not quick to the math like I'm not. And it was that summer, we were leading into summer, we were approaching our 10th wedding anniversary, which was June 15th of 2017, and we had a hell of a first half of the year. If you listen to last week's episode, you got kind of the rundown of my mom's story, and 2017 was a pivotal year in that story. So if you haven't listened to it, I don't want to take up time here rehashing that same stuff. So make sure you go back to last week's episode and listen. But for the long and short of it, it was a very hard year. We had 2 terrible losses in the beginning of the year. We were grieving pretty hard, and we were not feeling like any version of ourselves that we recognized. And my husband and I had a discussion, and we realized that we could pull a little bit of money out, and it may have felt in the moment a little irresponsible, but something inside of me, and I believe it was the Holy Spirit, was nudging me that we needed to take this trip for ourselves, whether it seemed to make sense in the bank account, and that we needed to start leaning into opportunities for the God we say we believe in to provide for us. And so we were going to use this little nest egg that we knew that we could accumulate in time, and we were going to do something for ourselves. And so we planned a trip, and we planned a trip that we had kind of been talking about wanting to take, and we headed down south to Savannah, Georgia. And we spent one night in a very fancy hotel right in downtown Savannah. And then we went on from there to spend the remainder of our long weekend, so to speak, at a friend of my husband's who had recently relocated, and they had kept touch. He and his wife had graciously offered for us to stay there and to kind of get a tour of Hilton Head Island and really just have a couple of enjoyable no hotel fee nights in our trip. So we agreed. So we packed up our minivan, and our youngest was just barely 2, and it felt a little weird to be leaving because we don't get away ever. And my mother had graciously volunteered to help us with our children here so that we could get away for this weekend. And I was excited. We were over exhausted from all of the things we had endured. And I think our level of excitement was a little tempered by that. So an excitement for that same anniversary trip today would be much more resounding than it was in the midst of our grief back then. And so we packed up the back of our van, and we set out on the road, and we headed down to Savannah. And when we arrived at the hotel, we had booked a cute little boutique hotel with a hotel brand that has become a staple for our family. We look for it every time we travel, and we always are disappointed when we can't find one in proximity. And this hotel chain has a handful of these boutique hotels around the country, and actually probably around the world, I think. But we found ourselves in one in Savannah, Georgia. And when we walked in after handing our keys over to the valet, it felt immediately a little lighter. It was like walking into the hotel, we could pretend for the weekend that we were not the people that we had been, that we had gone through all of the stuff we had gone through at the beginning of that year, that we could pretend we were people who could afford to stay at this place for a week straight if we wanted to, even though we were only staying for one night. And we walked up to check into our room, and they asked my husband as we were checking in if we were there celebrating anything. And he said, in fact, we're here celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary. And this hotel brand, at this very moment, received my loyalty for life. They immediately, without hesitation, offered to upgrade our room to a nicer suite so that we could fully enjoy our single night stay for our anniversary. And so with that, they redirected us to where our room that they were putting us in was, and we walked in to the nicest hotel room I have ever stayed at in my entire life. And I've stayed at some pretty nice hotel rooms, but nothing as grand as this. I felt royal. We had a little sitting room with a TV, a small little kitchenette. Then you walk through a separate door, like a whole door that closed just in a single room suite, into a room that had a big, beautiful, luxurious king-size bed in it. And then you look to your left and you go into the bathroom. And there was a gorgeous bathroom with a stand-up shower and a clawfoot soaking tub. I about cried from joy when I saw that. Now, once upon a time, I used to love to take a bath. But as I had gained weight and lost weight and gained weight and lost weight throughout my multi-year journey of having all four of my children, the idea of sitting in my rinky-dink little tub at home seemed just unnecessary. So I stopped taking baths. I mean, my tub barely, we all know, I don't need to give the visual. We all know what a small tub is like when you're trying to take a bath. And it was not something that I had done. So the idea of having this big, beautiful soaking tub was magical. I immediately walked out of the bathroom, and my husband was lounged on the bed, clicking the clicker to figure out something on the TV to watch while I got ready for dinner and settled in, because he knows what I'm like. I like to live in a hotel room, even if it's one night. I like to unpack. I like to live there for the night. I like, especially in a room that's nice, I like to feel like I'm far more luxurious than I really can afford a life of luxury. And so that's what I had done. I had gone straight to the bathroom to check out the space and start unpacking my things in the bathroom. And I immediately came back into the king-size bedroom and said, "Babe." And he looks at me from the TV. I don't know what he was watching. He was scrolling through trying to find something. And I was like, "There's a soaking tub," with so much genuine excitement. I bet you he had not seen that on my face since the previous year. And he smiled back and said, "Oh, that's awesome, babe. I'm glad you'll have to enjoy a bath at some point tonight." And I said, "Absolutely." So we had reservations, and I knew that it wasn't going to make sense to do a whole soak-in tub before we went out to dinner. So I unpacked to get situated into the room, and I filed away that little post-it note in my brain, "Soak in this tub before you check out in the morning." And we got ourselves ready, and we left the room so that we could explore Savannah a little bit before we made our way over to our dinner reservation. And so that's what we did. And my husband was actually dealing with a different injury at the time. And if you follow me on my social media, you may know that presently he is recovering from a spine injury that took place back early in the beginning of April. And at the time, he was dealing with an issue in his knee that has since mostly been rectified. It was a little irked up by the early months of this current injury, but he's feeling back to normal in the knee regard. But at the time, he was struggling with it. So we did some touring, but we could only do so much before it was going to be obvious that it was going to be uncomfortable for him. So after finding the Forrest Gump bench and touring around a little bit, we made our way over to the restaurant, the Paula Deen restaurant that we had our reservations at for dinner that evening. And once upon a time, early in our relationship, Paula Deen taught me how to cook with excess butter. I used to love watching the Food Network, and her and Rachel Ray taught me most of what I know in the kitchen. So, besides my mother, of course, obviously, my mother gave me a great foundation to leap into the kind of dishes that these two ladies demonstrated on TV. And even my mother and I have talked about how watching certain people do bigger things than you've done in the kitchen on TV, if they make it look easy enough, it gives you kind of guts to take after it. And when I was pregnant with my second, Paula Deen gave me guts to take on fried chicken from scratch, like soak it in the buttermilk, like the whole 9 yards. And it was an adventure. So my mother gave me the foundation and many recipes that I still cook to this day. And then those two ladies, as I was living on my own and finding hours of the day that I needed filled, I was watching those two women to learn deeper roots into certain types of food. So I was very excited to go to this restaurant, and we enjoyed every bite that we took from every plate that was served to our table. And I'm not going to get into all of that, because if you're not anywhere near food or listening to this at a time of day where you can't get yourself to food, I don't really want to torture you. And that's what this would be. It would be food torture. So I'm not going to go into the specifics, but we enjoyed everything. We finished our dinner. We made our way back to our hotel for the evening, and it was time for me to soak. And I did. And I soaked. And I felt like magical. Like I felt like a queen, like straight out of a fairy tale. It was the most relaxing bath I've probably ever taken in my life. And the bubbles and the water was clean up to my neck. And it was magical. And then got myself ready, and we went to bed and had the best night's sleep I've probably had to date. I don't know what kind of mattress. I kind of kick myself all the time when I think back to how magical that night's sleep was, that I didn't ask the hotel what kind of bed. My husband has done research. He thinks he's figured out what kind of bed it was, and we think we know the price tag on it. So hopefully at some point in the future, when we can afford to buy a bed of that caliber, we will once again get to sleep in this magical mattress. But it was great. And between the mattress and the bedding, it was like sleeping on a cloud. And we woke up the next morning and did our morning routine, hygiene, brush teeth, face wash, moisturize, all the things that some mornings, if I'm completely honest, when I'm at home and my children at my feet, do not always get executed in the morning ritualistically, especially back then when I was dealing with babies and toddlers. And so having no one to interrupt this entire process and no little bodies pulling at my legs while I was trying to brush my teeth or any of it felt, again, like I was royalty. And then we left the room. We packed our stuff. We packed our stuff. We left our luggage in the room, and we went down to go enjoy breakfast before we loaded up the little trolley and packed our bags to head on with the rest of our trip. And when we went down for breakfast, what we realized was it's not like a continental breakfast like you've ever seen. There was a gentleman behind the counter cooking up fresh omelets to your liking, fresh grits if that was your thing, and then you went on to a buffet that seemed every bit more elevated than any continental breakfast you've ever gotten in a normal hotel. And so we sat down after having a nice conversation with the chef while he made my omelet and my husband's grits, and we enjoyed our breakfast. We made our way back up to the room. We took our luggage back down, loaded the car up, settled ourselves at the counter, and told them that they had made customers for life. And then as we drove from that hotel, our short little jaunt towards Myrtle Beach, or Hilton Head, where our friends live, I was snacking on the leftover fried green tomatoes, ice cold out of the room refrigerator from the night before at the Paula Deen restaurant. And while we were taking this drive, I was thinking to myself that I felt more rested, more fueled, more wide awake and excited for the day, and more base level joy than I remember having felt the entire year. And it wasn't because my kids weren't with me, because I missed them terribly. But with them not with me, I had the time to do basic things for myself like I did without thinking back before I had children. basic things for myself that, if I was entirely honest with myself, which I was being in that car ride, were things that I did not execute day in and day out. And they're not even questionable. They are survival. They are sleeping, but not just sleeping, literally giving your body and your brain time to rest from the stress. When we walked into that hotel and decided we were going to be rich for the night, we were basically making an agreement with each other that we were not going to stress over any of life's real stressors. We were going to live in the moment. And in doing that, we were letting our brains rest from the stress. We gave our bodies relaxation and rest throughout the trip. And then we had the best night's sleep we'd ever had. Check one basic survival need: rest. Then I had nobody interrupting me and a bathroom that was like a sanctuary to take care of myself in. So it made prioritizing some of those basic hygiene things like the moisturizer and the eye cream. You know, we have to moisturize this largest organ on our body. And so we don't always do those steps, but they are still kind of basic hygiene. Brushing our teeth, flossing. Now, I personally, flossing really skeeves me, but brushing your teeth, using the mouthwash, making sure that when you are brushing your teeth, it's the length of time you should, that you're really being as detailed as maybe every teeth brushing should. These are things, cleaning yourself, showering, and or taking a bath. In my case, the bath with the nice little scented bubbles and all the things was an added layer of another thing that we require: personal care. And then last, we didn't have to cook our own meal, so we got additional rest while also checking off the nutrition box. And so when you think about it, it was really just basic level rest, hygiene, nutrition, and personal care. Just that little extra attention to what your body needs in that moment. That's all I did. Those are the 4 foundational steps of like every person's basic survival: is eating, sleeping, physically resting if you are overworked, hygiene so that we are healthy and clean, and taking attention to our needs, our personal care. And so while I was kind of rethinking those things over and over, it became really clear to me that those 4 things are not really even self-care. They are the basic survival steps that we should all be taking every day. And if you're doing those things and calling them self-care, then I'm sorry to tell you, you're wrong. And that makes me sad. But I realized, and here's where the lesson comes in, I realized that those 4 things are not self-care. They are survival. And that is why step 1, when you go through my 7-step method that I talk about in my book, that if you make your way over to my blog on thedazzlingdistrict.com, you will read about, that I reference in all of my social medias. If you find your way over to follow me on any of those, I talk about my 7-step method all the time. And that's because these are the steps that I just keep taking every day that make sure that I'm dazzling. And that is why the very first step is the foundational back to the basics in your self-care. So with that, I've, again, led from my story straight into my lesson, and I'm really thankful if you are listening. I am thankful if you were listening at the beginning. I'm thankful if you are listening now. I am thankful for every person that listens, for every minute that they do on this show. I really created this place to be a place that moms can come for permission to take care of themselves. And so consider this episode the lesson that you don't even really pour into yourself when you're doing just the basics. That is survival. That is making sure that your vessel isn't so beyond broken that what the good Lord is making sure you have every day to just wake up and fight another day doesn't completely leak out and leave your cup in pieces. This is how you take care of you at a base level so that your vessel can be intact and you can keep pushing through to each and every new day. So with that, I thank you again for listening, and I look forward to you being back and listening for next week. Stay dazzling. And if you don't know how to stay dazzling, make sure you follow this podcast. Make sure you're saving, and subscribing, even sharing if you're over on YouTube. If you're listening to me on Podbean or another streaming platform, just make sure you follow so you never miss a week, because I'll have you dazzling in no time. Ta-ta!